See, young leaders typically are at a certain age in which they're building up their careers. They're building up the careers based on, let's say, an ambition, a vision, and obviously, let's say, a very aggressive desire to meet that vision in the short term. Clearly, let's say, when they are doing that, in the short term and in the medium term, they are bound to face crisis and they're bound to face adversities. There's no question, but they will. As and when they do, I think it's important firstly to actually understand as to which part or which side is this adverse situation coming from. We can start from crisis management. If it's crisis management, for example, in which a crisis comes up upon you, which is totally unexpected, unlike, let's say, certain business cycles, then the reaction is to be very different. In the sense that when a crisis comes to you, typically it's uncharted territories, it's unpredictable, and at the same time, you don't know as to why and where is it coming from in the immediate term. So when a crisis comes upon you, especially let's say for young leaders, it's a very natural tendency to react very fast. In fact, I did when basically in my career I was into a certain situation in which I faced a particular crisis, and my first instinct was to react and react hard, which is exactly what we've been trained on, in the sense that our training and our ambitions drives us towards an instant reaction and an immediate reaction, which we think in our value system is the right thing to do because it's an aggressive intent backed by an aggressive action. So the first lesson clearly is that understand what that crisis is. Be patient, sit back, try and actually evaluate, try and measure it before you actually try and get some, let's say, reaction to it. And that's very, very critical and important, because you would actually in that crisis face situations and face contexts which you wouldn't be familiar with at all as such. And because that's the definition of a crisis, and especially let's say when it's an environmental crisis, for example. And if that be so, then you do need to actually understand what this is. Understand the crisis, understand the adversity, understand the adversary, and then try and actually move towards reacting to that in the most measured manner possible. It's very, very important at this stage not to get into instant reactions, but at the same time to plan. It's also extremely important to get resources from the environment, whether directly or indirectly, which will help you to understand as well as react to the crisis. Typically, young leaders have, let's say, a belief in, and if I may say so, some degree of arrogance in what they think is their own invincibility. That arrogance leads to a situation in which when you actually start trying to react to a crisis, you do it through your own frame. And that frame typically is not the right frame. And therefore, it's important that you are able to get allies, resources from outside to be able to understand and then be able to react to a particular situation. So that's basically in terms of, let's say, some crises which do come up time to time in certain situations, which typically could threaten the very basis of your business. So that's one part of it. Then if you're talking about adversity, adversity is a normal part of, let's say, doing business. You will face adversity of a minor variety or of a major variety at various points of time in your career, which will come, let's say, either in cyclical form, will come unexpectedly, will come in certain situations in which you don't even expect it to come. So therefore, I think you need to basically in those situations try and actually ride the wave to the extent possible. It's very difficult. It's very, very important at this point of time to understand as to what exactly is this adversity and whether it's controllable as far as you're concerned. Any degree of impetuousness will actually be harmful, and therefore you need to be very, very measured and patient in terms of how you deal with this. People do actually tend to take adversity with a certain degree of stress and emotion. That emotional quotient which you have, with which you react to adversity, needs to be tempered, needs to be curbed. Because this is a normal part of life, this is a normal part of, let's say, running a business. And therefore, you need to react to it in the best manner possible, vis-a-vis, let's say, a certain degree of patience, a certain degree of calmness, and at the same time, in a very, very measured situation. At times, you have to roll with the punches. You may have to actually sort of sit back and say, okay, bring it on. I will ride the wave. I will go through this particular bad phase. In certain situations, you may have to actually react to it. And all these are situations which you need to obviously evaluate, but do it with, let's say, as emotionless a situation as possible. Clearly, when you are talking about adversity, you have to get your team and you have to get the people around you also in the same mode. It's quite probable, and it always happens, that you let the people around you come down in terms of what their emotions are when it's adversity, in which their entire energy levels falls quite considerably. As a leader, I would suggest that A, you need to have a measured insulation as far as the people around you are concerned. When basically you face adversity, there is so much adversity which they can handle, and there is so much adversity which they can tackle as such. When you're talking about them absorbing and tackling a certain degree of adverse situations, you need to be very careful and calibrate as to how much do you empower them and or tell them to do in this sort of a situation, and how much confidence can you give them that the balance is basically under control, which means that you are breaking down in bits and pieces and then being able to actually distribute it across the system to be able to handle it in a certain collective manner. That's to my mind a hallmark of a leader, in the sense that when he has adversity, he needs to insulate his team from the entire impact of it, break it down into pieces, and then make the team react and act in a certain way in which they react to that and act on that to be able to overcome that. So I think the best of leadership qualities come out in adverse situations, and it is to a degree of, let's say, it has to be tackled in a very measured leadership fashion, in which you need to be in full control. You need to be in full control of your emotions. You need to be in full control, let's say, of the people around you who will enable you to actually overcome this particular adverse situations. And you need to then be able to insulate them and at the same time distribute and empower them to the extent that they are able to tackle this particular adverse situations in small bits and pieces.